this is Ramona from the Healing Grapevine, and today I'm on site with Stephen Scott at Terroir Seeds. And I first met Stephen about a month ago at a presentation he did which just knocked my socks off, and you can see it. I really recommend that you go to the Healing Grapevine Vimeo channel and watch his very comprehensive talk about the health issues and environmental issues of glyphosate, which is very commonly known as herbicide of Roundup, is the more general brand name for it, but it's widely used in the agricultural industries, and there's a lot of information that's very alarming, but also some really good solutions that come from understanding what that issue is and how it has trickled down into our food chain. Anyway, we're going to talk a little more about that today, but the whole presentation is already on the Vimeo channel, so please go visit that and see that. And today, we've already had a great tour. Stephen and his wife own Terroir Seeds, and it's basically an heirloom seed company. I'm not going to say too much because he'll do a better job at it. And Stephen, tell us all the good stuff you showed me today.
We're an internet-based, mail order-based, heirloom and open pollinated seed business. Our focus is home gardeners and small-scale growers, farmers markets, CSAs, that sort of thing, across North America. But we also have customers in, I think we're 63, 65 countries. So there's a good response worldwide with what we're doing. The heirloom varieties, the open pollinated varieties that they can save. It's the older varieties that have proven to have good value through several generations of seed saving. That's what we focus on. There's a lot more that we do with information, and Ramona and I will get into that a little bit. So it's a lot more than just seeds.
From soil to seed.
From the soil to the seed to the food you eat is our business motto.
So, in your motto, from soil to seed to the food we eat, you're really capturing the idea of what it's going to take for us to protect ourselves today.
Yes, in a lot of ways. And when we were invited to do the presentation on the glyphosate, we were actually part of a GMO education series. And there's a lot of volume, there's a lot of talk about the dangers of GMOs, and that's becoming a lot more widely known. But there's a lot of other aspects of commercial, chemical, industrial agriculture that the GMOs are just a part of that. And so that's why I did that focus point with the glyphosate, because the Roundup is not just an industrial herbicide. It's the most widely used lawn and home garden herbicide in America. I mean, you can get it at any Walmart, you can get it at any garden center, you can get it, I'm surprised the gas stations and convenience stores don't have it. So, there's so many dangers about that, and I don't want to go too far into that because I want to keep this on track. But watch that video and you'll understand more about it. That's why I wanted to focus on some of those other dangers, because those are things that too many of us aren't aware of at all, because we've been told all this is safe.
Yes, well, so as you were showing us outside and your compost piles and all the different experiments that you're doing to build your soil, and we kind of joked for a moment about how, folks are going, oh, I should make a garden, and so they go to the home garden center in their neighborhood and they buy their bag of soil, and of course they should buy that weed killer there, shouldn't they? Because how else do you garden otherwise? And so you've really taken on a very active voice in the community to help us understand and learn. Make it a little easier and not so just at the whim of marketing.
Right.
Right. Once upon a time, Roundup was said to be biodegradable.
Right.
And we now know it's not.
DDT was supposedly safe as well.
Yeah, I used to run around in those smoke trucks
right. Well,
as a kid.
So did I.
We'd go play in that stuff.
It's just amazing. Part of what we've seen, and this is what we talked about, looking in the garden, was we as a culture, as a nation, have lost so much agricultural knowledge, and this was commonly known agricultural knowledge in the past 70 years through a myriad of reasons. And you know, the reasons don't really matter, but the end effect does. We don't know what healthy soil is. We don't understand how to build healthy soil. We are educated that just like you said, you know, you go buy your soil, or you know, you buy these bags of stuff that you don't really sure what it is or what it does. You put it on in your garden and you grow with it, and then if you've got, you know, mold, there's a spray for that. If you've got insects, there's a spray for that. If you know, your leaves turn green, there's a spray for that. If you've got end rot on your tomatoes, there's a spray for that as well. And so, but that's not sustainable. You wind up eating all of those chemicals that you're spraying, and a lot of people don't make that connection. And so, from the soil to the seed to the food you eat really takes a look at how to build the soil in the most biologically responsible manner, put it into an ever-increasing spiral of health and productivity and fertility. Then you combine that with high-quality, heirloom, open-pollinated seeds that nobody has a patent on, nobody has rights to, that you can choose to save those seeds year from year. Then it goes full circle into the food. With those first two elements together, you wind up producing the most healthy food. And it's an amazing fact today that building your soil and growing your own garden, even if you only grow some of your own food, you can measurably improve your own health while saving a lot of money from a small garden plot. And it doesn't have to be a quarter-acre garden. It can be even container gardens. It's really, truly amazing. So that's what we really look at, is the holistic approach of how can we help people understand better how to do these things that are non-toxic. You don't have to be worried that your kid or your dog gets into the compost pile. You know, it just, there's no dangers there. That's
awesome. Because I know that for a lot of people the concern is, how can I afford to go organic?
Exactly.
And then that also, I mean, I'm a little cynical about this, and maybe you can enlighten me, because I've made the joke often that how is it possible that there could be any organic farming in the state of California? And speak to us a moment about, I know I'm being a little extreme with that comment, but speak a little bit about what they've learned in, you know, the sort of spread factor in rainwaters, you know, and things like that, where the organic industry is not able to keep up with what's really happening in the big agri-industry, if you will, and the contamination and the cross.
Right, and part of the concern is large-scale agriculture. You get the economies of scale, but at the same time you get economies of problems with huge factors of chemicals used, even if they are organically certified. Just the sheer volume of what has to be done. And that's why you see some of your smaller farms are your most, not only the most productive volume of produce-wise, but also the most profitable, simply because of the range of what they're producing. They're not monocrops. You know, they're producing 10 or 12 or 15 different types of crops. Granted, a lot smaller, but on human scale agriculture, you wind up being, in a lot of times, a lot more effective. When you get into a lot larger scale, there's a lot of cracks that things can seep into. So if you're farming 1,000 acres, you're having to use equipment, and you automatically have some wastage. You automatically have employees that may not understand a little bit too much is really bad, or winds up with drift or with runoff and you know, those sort of things. So there are definitely some concerns with that approach.
Right. So the real solution, going local, I mean, that's becoming a huge movement now. And that's what's so wonderful about having found you. I mean, you know, here I am, I moved to a tiny little town, Arizona, and just happened to notice this flyer up on the board in town at the little health food store about this talk that you were going to give. And then being able to come out here and walk the property, see the real practice and the, I guess, level of integrity or rigor with which each person or each farmer is producing. I know that you do that with your seeds. You know, same concerns.
Right, and we really advocate the whole getting to know who grows your food. And in our opinion, the very best thing you can do is grow your own garden, okay? But we also recognize that not everybody can grow all of their own food. That's pretty impractical. But so the next, it's a nested approach, is grow as much of your own food as you can and are comfortable with. Whether that's just a couple of planters in the windowsill with some herbs, with a couple 5-gallon buckets of tomatoes, whatever. But then the next step is getting to know, and not just getting to know through their marketing, but personally getting to know who's growing your food. So that's where the farmers markets and CSA's community supported agriculture are so key, because you go to your farmers market and you see typically the person who grow your food, you know, with dirt on their hands from sometimes being up all night pulling the produce to get it to you the next morning. And you can actually ask them the questions, how are these things grown? You can ask those concerns. What were you using chemicals? Were you using pesticides? How are you feeding the soil? You know, as you get more educated, you can ask those questions of the grower. And it's not a marketing department that's answering you. You know, if you have a question about the chickens, if you have a question about the eggs or that sort of a thing, you're actually talking to the person who grew them that can give you a direct answer. Whereas if you have, you know, if you buy a bad chicken, you know, even from Whole Foods, you're going back to Whole Foods and you're talking to a manager in that department, and that's eventually going to get back to the grower possibly. But if there's a bad practice in your local system, that's going to be corrected immediately.
Yeah, it's quicker to spot.
Just because everybody has a lot more vested interest in it.
Sure. Yeah, I actually had that experience in talking to a butcher at Whole Foods one day. Oops, we're not supposed to badmouth anybody, but anyway. And they didn't understand well enough to give me the information properly. And you know, this is the challenge for us as consumers, is to, you know, get our education so that we are asking the question that will get us the answer that's most effective or most informed. And as a discerning consumer, I can then make that decision, okay, I'm not going to buy here, or I'm, you know, things like the lists in the Dirty Dozen, you know, learning what are the top, if you're going to, if you can't buy everything organic, at least buy these organic. This kind of information that's being shared. You have a great blog.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's at Underwood Gardens.
Well, it's underwoodgardens.com.
Yes.
And there's just one toolbar at the top for navigation, and you go to the blog, and on the blog on the right hand side is all the different topics that we talk about, from soil building to seed starting to seed saving to our trip to Terra Madre with Slow Foods last October. We also have an ingredients list. We're working on getting a lot of recipes up so people can understand, okay, I you know, this kohlrabi sounds really cool and I grew it, but now what do I do with it? So you can go to kohlrabi, and eventually there'll be multiple recipes for every ingredient, every variety that we sell, which helps make a better decision. Okay, you don't want to try something new.
Well, that's one of the challenges I hear about in the CSA programs, because you don't always know what you're going to get in your box every week, and then it's like, what do I do with this? What is this? Right. And so being able to have a site to resource for that information and give you recommendations is awesome.
Thank you.
I want to pick up one particular topic that you touched on in the presentation on the glyphosate, where you spoke about how you all are working to remediate the soil. And would you go ahead and talk again about the challenge of the glyphosate in the soil, what you know about its lifetime, and what are you doing to...
Sure, there's, the concern is we've been taught that glyphosate is biologically broken down in a fairly short amount of time when it hits the soil. And that's not exactly true. It is inactivated it binds with the soil, which is all well and good up until you hit the tipping point to where there's enough glyphosate that has bound with the soil that you now get glyphosate washing out because there's not enough soil to continue to bind.
So it spills over.
Exactly, and that's why you see glyphosate in our streams and our waterways, you know, that go down into lakes, into, you know, contributing to the dead zone, you know, outside of New Orleans. Is there's so much, and there's nested issues with that that have brought this about, you know, with the super weeds that are glyphosate resistant. So now farmers used to only apply the Roundup once a year. Now are applying it 3 times a year, and they're seeing that they need to apply it a 4th time, but a lot of farmers are refusing to because of the added expense, and they're realizing that if I put it on a 4th time, you know, they're hitting that diminishing return, you know, at that 2nd time. And you know, and so they're just refusing. Look, I'm not going to do it because it's not going to do anything. The good news is glyphosate can be inactivated. It can be broken down, but it's an extremely long process. It takes a healthy, biologically active soil, and it takes several years in some situations to break that glyphosate down into some of its components. It's really a mixed bag of news here, because as the glyphosate breaks down, it actually becomes more dangerous for the first few generations. Then you know, it gradually becomes less dangerous after that. But the biggest thing that we can do as individuals, you know, because you may have a neighbor who is putting Roundup on his lawn, trying to get rid of dandelions or whatever. Right. He's upwind of you, he's upwater of you. You know, if it rains and you have his lawn water washing onto your property, you're getting Roundup onto your property. The good news is, unless this has been going on for a long time and really heavy applications, the soil's probably inactivating it, binding it. But what we can do, especially in our gardens, remineralizing the earth, the soil, has been proven to be effective in binding with the glyphosate to inactivate it and pull it out of circulation. And at that point, the remineralization helps continue and restore the biological life in the soil. All your microbes, your mycorrhizae, your fungals, all of those get to start chewing on the glyphosate to eventually break it down. An interesting side note that we had mentioned before is the minerals, and the 2 most common are azomite, Azomite, and elomite. They're both Utah volcanic rock dust, and they're completely inert. You can feed them to chickens. They help increase, they stop pecking of the chickens, they'll stop the chickens from eating the eggs, increase the strength of the eggshell. But you can feed them to horses and sheep and cattle and pigs, and we can take it in, and it helps to remineralize our bodies as well. There's 70 minerals and trace elements. So there's a lot of benefits with that, but that's one of the most effective methods of it. You know, if you wind up having some contamination, or you suspect some contamination, the remineralization really kind of helps inactivate the glyphosate.
See, I find that really interesting, because can I jump to the conclusion then that in terms of, you know, in your presentation you mentioned that corn syrup and corn products are delivering some of the highest payloads of glyphosate to us as we consume these products. Then can I make the assumption from what you've just said that remineralizing myself on a daily basis would help to possibly bind or remediate that in my own?
It's a good assumption, and it's basically an assumption at this point, because there may be studies out there. I'm not aware of any specific studies looking at that. There's definitely a need for that, simply because of what you just talked about, of we're far up on the food chain, and so the glyphosate's applied to the corn, it's absorbed in the corn, and then as that number 2 field corn is converted into high fructose corn syrup, that glyphosate is concentrated. And so, you know, as we drink sodas, we have anything with high fructose corn syrup, we're getting extra delivery of that. But this isn't something that has been recognized really medically very much. I mean, the medical industry is just starting to recognize that high fructose corn syrup isn't the greatest thing for us. So it would be neat to see some studies on that. But I think the assumption is very solid that if the azomite and elamite are working in the soil, and you can see the health benefits in other animals, that it's not going to be a detriment to us. The additional minerals and trace elements are going to help us, but more than likely it will help bind glyphosate and inactivate it, and hopefully we can flush it out. Right. So I think it's a solid assumption.
Yeah, I'm going with that one. I mean, it is part of the protocol already that is highly recommended by most naturopaths. If you're chronically ill, you have a mineral deficiency. And we also know that through the agricultural industry's practices of years and years and years, that food itself, you know, the apple has less mineral nutrition to deliver.
Yes.
And so, again, we're getting depleted. We've just been depleted since...
I mean, and you're absolutely right. And it's, again, something that a lot of folks, I don't think, look at, because remineralizing the earth, restoring the minerals that and the nutrients that the simple act of growing plants extract those minerals, because that's what they need to live, and then we eat those. And so the thought hasn't been to reconnect and restore that earth. And so over, you know, 50, 60, 70 years, you know, and you can look at studies from the USDA on this that's amazing. From the 20s until the 80s, the mineral content in some of our foods is dropped by 80%. So even if we're staying away from GMOs, even if we're eating healthy and staying away from processed foods and high fructose corn syrup and all of that, we're still not getting enough nutrition and the nutrients and minerals that we need, simply because the soil itself is depleted.
Right, right.
So, you know, and that speaks to why mineral supplements and homeopathic applications and a lot of these things aren't just a fad, they're very necessary. And growing your own garden and getting to know who's growing your food, all of these things are nested and intertwined in getting us to a better health.
Yes. Yes. Well, I have one more thing I want to talk about in this particular moment.
Sure.
The other day I was reading something on the news, and I chatted with you on the phone about this, where there was this kind of fearful idea about the seed registration of heirloom seeds, and that they were trying to lock down the make it harder to get a hold of heirloom seeds. And in the one particular article I read about it, it was almost like, you know, one of those things where you hear the FDA is going to take away all of our supplements and we're not going to be able to.
Right.
And so it had a little bit of that kind of fear tactic to it. Could you speak a moment about what's really going on there? And because, I mean, for me, spring's coming, and I want my little garden and backyard to be growing and happy.
Sure.
So speak a moment about what's really going on with the seed industry. And
there's a lot of fear mongering right now, but that's common, unfortunately, because there's a lot of unknowns. There are some things that are occurring that are concerning to us. In Europe, there's legislation called the Codex Alimentarius, and part of the Codex deals with seed varieties. And on the surface of it, it sounds benign and protective. You want to have recognized seed varieties to be able to go forward with. But the problem is there's a lot of historical heirloom varieties that are not on this list. So what's in reality what's happening is it's protecting the corporate seed companies in Europe, giving them a lot more market share because your heirloom seed companies, there's one in particular that's been in some pretty serious legal battles in France. Cocopelli Seed Company is the name of it, challenging this because they had some 400 varieties that of recognized heirlooms that the European Union recognized had historical precedent in Europe, but were not on this codex, and so therefore were not allowed to be sold until they had been tested and approved. And it's about $600, if I remember right, to test and approve each variety. So even as a moderately sized seed company, if you've got 400 varieties, that's, let's just say $500 for each variety, and it's going to be a couple, 3 years to do this testing and approving, it's an onerous burden. The UN is looking at modeling some of that, and so there is some talk in some of the legislation that's looking at this codex
as a standard.
As a standard, right?
Okay.
And so, you know, whether at this point it's conjecture. You know, I don't know what's going to go forward with it, but the large industrial organizations have a vested interest in selling their brand of pesticide and their brand of seed and their brand of fertilizers. So I can't see that this is an idle conjecture. It's something that we definitely need to be aware of, and organizations like Seed Savers Exchange, which is a member-to-member seed exchange, and decentralized independent gardeners saving their own seeds, saving their own varieties that are adapted to their conditions, back to your farmers markets, back to your local sustainable agriculture. That's kind of the best response to any centralized organization that's trying to control seeds. So it's something that bears watching, and we need to operate not out of fear, but out of a positive, let's move forward, let's take responsibility and control for our own actions, our own food, our own life. Not wait or, you know, for some other entity to try to do this for us.
Right.
Because it isn't going to be in our best interest.
Well, self-responsibility is part of the sustainable model, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. So, you know, the good news is that there's a lot we can do.
Yes, and that's the thing that we talk a lot about with our customers and educate folks on is, you know, because it's easy to go, what can I do? I'm one person. The biggest thing you can do is take responsibility for what you do, for your actions, for your life. And it takes some work, okay? This is not easy. Get educated, spend some time reading, ask a lot of questions, but do something. Start a garden, plant, you know, some lettuce seedlings, plant a tomato in a 5-gallon bucket. Do something to move forward, to take action on those responsibilities. And it's not going to be as easy as some of the slick gardening magazines make it look like, but it's also not going to be nearly as hard as some of the fear-mongering forums on the website are going to lead you to believe. It's going to be somewhere in between. But if you don't take responsibility for what you're doing, nobody else is really truly going to be able to take responsibility for you. Government says they do, but a lot of folks aren't really happy with the responsibility that most government entities have taken.
Right.
So the only other alternative is, you know, I want to know what I'm doing, and I want to make sure what I'm doing is the best that I can, and that's what you do.
Great. Thanks for your wisdom, Stephen. All right, this is Ramona from the Healing Grapevine. Thank you so much, and stay tuned.
Thank you.